April 21, 1945. Aussee, Austria. Deep in the Austrian Alps, a group of American officers descended into a salt mine. Not combat soldiers. These men were middle-aged, art historians, museum curators, professors. They wore military uniforms with officer ranks, but they weren't warriors in the traditional sense. They were searching for stolen art. Intelligence reports indicated the Nazis had hidden artworks in this mine. Massive quantities. Possibly thousands of pieces looted from across occupied Europe. The mine went deep underground. Vast caverns carved from centuries of salt extraction. Cool, dry, perfect conditions for preserving delicate materials. Perfect for hiding things you didn't want found. As they descended deeper into the mine system, they started finding it. Paintings, sculptures, crates, stacks of art everywhere. Inside chambers, in passages, protected by wooden crates and careful wrapping. They examined some pieces. Jan van Eyck's Ghent Altarpiece, 12 panels, one of the most important artworks in European history. Thought lost. Here, in a salt mine under the Austrian Alps. Michelangelo sculptures, multiple pieces, priceless. Vermeer paintings, several, some of the most valuable paintings in existence. Rembrandt works, Raphael. The collection was staggering. They kept finding more. Each chamber revealed additional treasures. The scale was beyond anything they'd anticipated. Final count: 6,500 paintings and sculptures. The greatest art collection ever assembled in a single location. Hitler's personal collection. Stolen from museums, churches, private collections across occupied Europe. Intended for a planned museum in Hitler's hometown of Linz, Austria. A museum that would be the greatest art museum in the world. But Hitler's plans had changed. Germany was collapsing, the war was lost, and Hitler had issued orders. If Germany couldn't win, everything would be destroyed. The Nero Decree, March 19, 1945. Destroy everything before the Allies captured it. Infrastructure, industries, cultural treasures, everything. The Americans examining the art discovered something terrifying. Bombs placed throughout the mine, tons of explosives, positioned to bring down the mine chambers, bury everything, destroy the entire collection. The detonation orders hadn't been executed yet, but they could be at any time. Hitler's scorched earth policy was being implemented across Germany. Bridges blown, factories demolished, everything destroyed rather than surrendered. These art historians weren't bomb disposal experts, but they understood what they were looking at. If those explosives detonated, 6,500 masterpieces would be destroyed, buried under millions of tons of rock and salt, lost forever. European cultural heritage erased in minutes. They had hours, maybe less. They needed to find the bombs, disable them, save the art before Hitler's final act of destruction was executed. This is the story of the Monument's Men, 345 men and women who followed Allied armies across Europe during World War II. Museum directors, curators, art historians, architects, archivists, given military ranks, sent into combat zones. Mission: find stolen art before the Nazis destroyed it. Save European civilization's cultural heritage from deliberate annihilation. 2 of them died doing it, killed by artillery and sniper fire while protecting art. The rest persevered. They found millions of artworks, returned them to rightful owners and countries, saved cultural treasures that define Western civilization. And they did it while Germany collapsed around them, racing against Hitler's orders to destroy everything. The story begins in 1943. The Allies were advancing. North Africa secured, Sicily taken, Italy invaded. The eventual defeat of Nazi Germany seemed increasingly likely. Planning began for occupying Germany and liberated territories. Someone raised a question. What about Europe's cultural treasures? The art, the historical monuments, the archives. Everyone knew the Nazis had been looting. From the moment they invaded Poland in 1939, Nazi officials had systematically plundered cultural treasures. Art from museums, private collections stolen from Jewish families, church treasures seized, historical artifacts taken. Everything of value disappeared into Nazi hands. The scale was staggering. Estimates suggested 5 million to 10 million artworks, cultural objects, and archival materials had been looted. The greatest theft of cultural property in history. Organized, systematic, documented. Hitler had personal interest in this. He fancied himself an artist, a failed one. He'd been rejected by art schools in his youth, but he maintained strong opinions about art. He collected obsessively, planned to build the world's greatest art museum in Linz, Austria, his childhood hometown. This museum would showcase the supremacy of German culture, would house the greatest masterpieces of European art, all in Linz. Hitler's vanity project. But Hitler's artistic vision was twisted. He categorized art as acceptable or degenerate. Acceptable art meant traditional, representational work, preferably Germanic in character, classical styles, romantic landscapes, historical paintings. Degenerate art meant modern works, Impressionism, Expressionism, abstract art, anything innovative or non-traditional, anything by Jewish artists. All of this was considered degenerate, corrupt, evidence of cultural decay. Hitler's plan had two parts. First, collect all acceptable art for his Linz museum. Second, destroy all degenerate art. Burn it. Eliminate it from existence. Purify European culture by destroying anything that didn't fit his narrow vision. Allied planners realized this cultural catastrophe was unfolding. Millions of artworks stolen. Museums emptied. Private collections seized. And no one knew where it all was. The Nazis had hidden it, scattered across Germany and occupied territories, in castles, in monasteries, in mines, anywhere secure and dry. Worse, as Germany collapsed, the Nazis might destroy it all rather than let the Allies recover it. Scorched earth. If Hitler couldn't have European culture, no one could. Allied leadership needed to act. They needed people who could identify valuable art, who knew what to look for, who could distinguish a priceless Rembrandt from a worthless copy, who understood how to protect and preserve delicate artworks in the chaos of war. They needed art experts, but with military training, who could operate in combat zones, who could follow armies into dangerous territory and work under fire if necessary. The Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program was created, MFAA. Informally, they became known as the Monuments Men, though the group included women as well. Recruitment began, museum directors from major institutions, curators with expertise in specific periods or artists, art historians from universities, architects who understood historical buildings, archivists who knew historical documents, conservators who knew how to preserve damaged artworks. These weren't young men. Most were middle-aged, in their 40s, some in their 50s. They had established careers, families, comfortable lives. They volunteered anyway, left their museums and universities, enlisted in the military, trained for war. Military training was abbreviated. They needed to know basic military protocol, how to wear uniforms correctly, how to salute, how to work within military command structures. But they weren't being trained as combat soldiers. Their weapon was knowledge. Their mission was preservation. They were given officer ranks, captains, majors, some lieutenants. This gave them authority to work with military units, to request transportation, to access areas under military control. Without rank, they'd be ignored. With it, they could operate effectively. By late 1944, monuments men were deployed across Europe, following Allied armies, entering newly liberated cities and territories, assessing damage to cultural sites, searching for hidden art, documenting what they found. The challenges were enormous. Europe was a war zone. Buildings were being destroyed, cities bombed. The front lines shifted constantly. Working in this chaos was dangerous. They also faced indifference. Combat commanders had priorities: winning battles, defeating Germans, advancing toward Berlin. Protecting art seemed frivolous compared to saving lives and winning the war. Some commanders were hostile, saw the monuments men as unnecessary distractions, refused to provide resources or cooperation. The monuments men had to prove their value, had to convince skeptical officers that cultural preservation mattered, and they were racing against time. As Allied armies advanced, the Nazis retreated. And as they retreated, they sometimes destroyed what they couldn't take. Buildings demolished, archives burned, art destroyed rather than surrendered. The monuments men started finding things. In France, they discovered the Nazis had used the Jeu de Paume Museum in Paris as a sorting center for looted art. Everything stolen in France had passed through here before being shipped to Germany. A French woman named Rose Valland had worked at the museum during the occupation. Secretary! The Nazis assumed she understood little and paid her no attention. But Rose Valland spoke German fluently. She secretly documented everything. Recorded which artworks were shipped where, which trains they went on, which destinations. She took enormous risks. If discovered, she'd be executed, but she kept her secret records. When the monuments men arrived, Rose Valland gave them everything. Her records were invaluable. They showed where thousands of artworks had been sent, provided leads for recovery efforts. Rose Valland's courage and careful documentation made recovering French art possible. As Allied armies pushed into Germany, the monuments men started finding the major caches. The Nazis had hidden art in locations across Germany and Austria, castles, monasteries, and especially mines. Salt mines and other underground facilities were ideal. Dry, secure, protected from bombing. Near Frankfurt, they found the Merkers salt mine, enormous underground complex. Inside, entire collections from Berlin museums, evacuated to protect them from Allied bombing. Thousands of artworks, properly stored, carefully preserved. The Germans had protected their own cultural heritage, at least, but they also found something else. Nazi gold reserves, literal tons of gold bars, stolen from occupied countries. From Jewish victims, Reich bank reserves, a fortune hidden underground. The discoveries continued. Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, the Rothschild family collection, one of the world's greatest private art collections, all of it stolen. Hidden in this fairy tale castle. Various locations across Austria and southern Germany yielded more. Each discovery was documented, photographed, catalogued. The monuments men worked methodically. They needed to know what had been found, where it came from, who it belonged to. But they kept hearing about Aussee, intelligence reports, rumors from resistance sources. Something big was hidden there, possibly the most important cache. Hitler's personal collection for the Linz Museum. Aussee was a salt mine in the Austrian Alps, remote, heavily guarded. The Nazis had used it to store the most valuable pieces, the crown jewels of looted art. April 1945. Allied forces reached the area. The monument's men went immediately to the mine. What they found exceeded every expectation. 6,500 paintings and sculptures. In chambers throughout the mine complex, masterpieces of European art, Jan van Eyck's Ghent Altarpiece, multiple Vermeer paintings, Michelangelo sculptures, Rembrandt, Raphael, Dürer, Leonardo da Vinci drawings, on and on. The greatest art collection in history, but they also found the bombs. The SS had placed explosives throughout the mine, 500-kilogram bombs, positioned to collapse the chambers, bury everything. The orders were clear. Hitler's Nero decree: if Germany falls, destroy everything. Don't let the Allies have anything. Scorched earth, total destruction. The SS officer in charge of Aussee had received the detonation orders, but he'd delayed. He wasn't an art expert, but he understood what was in the mine, the artistic and cultural importance. Destroying it seemed wrong, even to him, even with direct orders from Hitler. He'd stalled, made excuses, claimed technical difficulties, waited, hoping the war would end before he had to execute the orders, hoping the Allies would arrive first. They did, by hours, maybe a day. The monument's men arrived, found the bombs. The SS officer, surprisingly, cooperated. He'd been waiting for an excuse not to blow it up. The Americans arriving provided that excuse. The bombs were removed carefully, diffused, transported away from the art. The mine was secured. The art was safe. The monument's men began the enormous task of cataloging everything. 6,500 pieces. Each needed to be identified, documented, assessed for condition, determined ownership. It would take months, but it was saved. That's what mattered. The Aussee discovery was the largest, but similar finds happened across Germany and Austria. Castle after castle, mine after mine, church after church. The Nazis had hidden art everywhere, and the monument's men found it. Not all discoveries were happy. Sometimes they found evidence of destruction. The Nazis had burned some degenerate art, deliberately destroyed works by modern artists, by Jewish artists, paintings that didn't fit Hitler's vision. Gone, turned to ash. Cultural vandalism on massive scale. They documented the losses, recorded what had been destroyed, made sure the world would know what had been lost. Even if the art itself couldn't be recovered, the record of its destruction was important. The human cost was real. 2 monument's men were killed during the war. Captain Walter Huchthausen, German-American, killed by sniper fire near Cleves, Germany. He'd been examining a damaged church, assessing whether it could be preserved. A German sniper shot him. Captain Ronald Balfour, British, art historian from Cambridge University, killed by artillery near Cleves as well. He'd been protecting historical buildings from unnecessary damage. Artillery fire killed him instantly. 2 men who gave their lives to save art and cultural heritage. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense, but they died doing what they believed mattered, preserving civilization. The end of the war brought new challenges. Millions of artworks, scattered across Europe, all needed to be returned to rightful owners. But who owned what? Jewish families murdered in the Holocaust, their collections stolen. Who were the heirs? How do you trace ownership when entire families were exterminated? Countries wanted their national treasures back. Museums wanted their collections returned. Private owners, those who survived, wanted their property. It was an enormous logistical and legal challenge. The monument's men worked on restitution for years after the war. setting up collection points, central locations where recovered art was gathered, documented, displayed for potential owners to identify. If you thought a painting was yours, you could come view it, provide proof of ownership, claim it. The process was painstaking. Some artworks had clear provenance, easy to trace. These were returned quickly. Others were complicated, disputed ownership, stolen multiple times, changed hands several times during the war. These cases took years to resolve. Some are still unresolved today. The sheer scale of recovery was remarkable. The monuments men and their successors identified and returned millions of artworks and cultural objects. Libraries rebuilt collections, museums recovered pieces. Private collectors, those who survived, got treasures back. But not everything was recovered. Some art is still missing, hidden in private collections, stolen and never surfaced, destroyed and not documented. The search continues today. Families still seeking heirlooms, museums still researching pieces that vanished during the war, and controversies remain. Some art was never returned properly, ended up in museums or private collections that acquired it in questionable ways. Restitution cases are filed regularly. Descendants of Holocaust victims seeking art stolen from grandparents. Museums forced to return pieces after research reveals they were looted. The monuments. Men's work established principles for cultural protection during war. The idea that cultural heritage matters, that art and historical monuments are worth protecting even during conflict, that deliberate destruction of cultural property is a crime. These principles were codified into international law, the Hague Convention, UNESCO conventions, protections for cultural property during armed conflict, obligations to protect historical sites, prohibitions on deliberate destruction of cultural heritage, all rooted in lessons learned from World War II and the monuments men's work. Modern militaries train personnel to identify and protect cultural sites. Operations in Iraq and Afghanistan included cultural advisors, trying to prevent damage to historical sites. Not always successfully, the Baghdad Museum was looted in 2003, and ISIS deliberately destroyed cultural sites in Syria and Iraq. But the principle exists. Cultural protection is part of military planning now. The monuments men themselves mostly returned to their pre-war lives, museums, universities. They resumed careers interrupted by war. But they'd done something extraordinary. They'd saved civilization's artistic heritage. Museums around the world owe their collections to these people. George Stout, one of the leaders, returned to museum work in America, directed conservation programs, trained the next generation of conservators. His techniques for protecting and preserving art under difficult conditions became standard practice. James Rorimer returned to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, eventually became the Met's director, led one of the world's great museums. The experience of finding and recovering looted art shaped his understanding of museum responsibility. Others went to different museums, different universities. They carried their experiences with them, understood the fragility of cultural heritage, the ease with which it could be lost, the importance of protecting it. Some wrote about their experiences, published accounts of operations, academic papers on cultural preservation, memoirs sharing stories. For decades, these accounts were read mainly by specialists, art historians, museum professionals. The general public knew little about the monuments men. That changed in 2009. Robert Edsel published a book, The Monuments Men, Allied Heroes, Nazi Thieves, and the Greatest Treasure Hunt in History. Comprehensive account of the program, the people, The operations, the discoveries, the book was popular, became a bestseller, introduced the Monuments Men story to general audiences. People were amazed. They'd never heard about this. Middle-aged art professors saving art from Nazis? It sounded like a movie. It became one. 2014. George Clooney directed and starred in The Monuments Men. Fictionalized but based on real events. Featured Clooney, Matt Damon, Kate Blanchett, Bill Murray. Major Hollywood production. The film had mixed reviews. Some criticized it for simplifying the story, for Hollywoodizing what was actually more complex, but it brought massive attention to the story. Millions of people learned about the Monuments Men from that film. Suddenly, it was part of popular culture. The renewed attention raised awareness about ongoing restitution issues. People realized this story wasn't just historical. It continues today. Art looted during World War II is still being identified and returned. Families still seeking stolen property. Museums still researching provenance. The Monuments Men's work isn't finished. It also highlighted the vulnerability of cultural heritage during conflict. Syria's civil war was destroying archaeological sites. ISIS was deliberately targeting cultural monuments. The Taliban had destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas. Cultural destruction continues. The principles the Monuments Men fought for, protecting cultural heritage during war, remain urgent and relevant. Hitler's plan for Aussee would have erased major pieces of European art history. The Ghent Altarpiece alone, Jan van Eyck's masterpiece, completed in 1432, is one of the most important artworks in Western art. 12 panels, elaborate, detailed, revolutionary for its time. Losing it would have been catastrophic for art history. The Vermeer paintings at Aussee included some of the finest examples of Dutch Golden Age painting. Vermeer only painted about 35 works in his life. Losing several would have significantly reduced his surviving oeuvre. Art historians' understanding of his development would be impaired. Michelangelo sculptures, Rembrandt paintings, Raphael works. Each of these represents pinnacles of artistic achievement, irreplaceable. Destroying them wouldn't just mean losing valuable objects, it would mean losing cultural touchstones that define European civilization. Hitler understood this. That's why the destruction orders were given. If Germany couldn't dominate Europe culturally, then Europe's culture itself would be destroyed. Nihilistic, spiteful, but consistent with Nazi ideology taken to its logical extreme. The Monuments Men prevented this. 6,500 pieces at Aussee alone. Millions more across Europe. They worked in dangerous conditions. 2 were killed, others wounded. They persevered because they understood what was at stake. This wasn't about monetary value. Though the art was worth billions, it was about cultural heritage, shared human achievement, the idea that some things transcend national boundaries and political conflicts, that Vermeer's paintings belong to humanity, not just Holland, that Michelangelo's sculptures are universal heritage, not just Italian property. The Monuments Men embodied that principle. They worked to save European art regardless of what country it came from. American, British, French, German, they protected it all. The goal was preservation for its own sake, for future generations, for civilization, and they succeeded. The art they saved is in museums now, accessible to millions. You can visit the Louvre and see works the Monuments Men recovered. The Met, the National Gallery in London, the Prado. Museums worldwide display art that would have been destroyed if not for 345 middle-aged art experts who followed armies into danger. That's the legacy. Not just the immediate act of saving art, but the principle established that cultural preservation matters, that it's worth risking lives, that civilization isn't just about surviving, but about preserving what makes life worth living. Article, beauty, cultural achievement. The monuments. Men weren't traditional warriors. They didn't kill enemy soldiers, didn't capture territory, didn't destroy targets. They saved things instead of destroying them. In a war defined by destruction, they were preservers, protectors, guardians of culture. 2 of them died doing it. Ronald Balfour never saw his collection returned to Cambridge. Walter Huchthausen never saw the churches he tried to save rebuilt. They gave their lives so that art and cultural heritage could survive. The others lived to see the fruits of their labor. Museums reopened with recovered collections. Churches rebuilt with salvaged treasures. Private owners reunited with family heirlooms. The cultural landscape of Europe restored. Not perfectly. Much was lost, destroyed, or still missing. But what remained was because of the monuments men. Because 345 people believed that saving civilization's art was worth the risk, worth leaving comfortable careers, worth entering war zones, worth dying for. 6,500 paintings and sculptures in Aussee, found hours before detonation, saved from deliberate destruction. That's the story everyone knows now, the climax, the dramatic rescue. But the real story is larger. Millions of artworks, scattered across Europe, hidden in hundreds of locations, all found, documented, returned. Over months and years of painstaking work, by people who believed culture was worth preserving, even when everything around them was being destroyed. The monuments men proved that some things transcend war, that even in the worst conflict in human history, civilization's cultural heritage could be protected. Not always, not completely, but enough. Enough that museums still have collections. Enough that we can see Vermeer's light, Michelangelo's mastery, Van Eyck's detail. Because middle-aged art professors went to war armed with knowledge instead of weapons. And they won. They saved civilization's art. They saved pieces of what makes us human.